Hey, Josh from Bernal Cutlery. Welcome back. Wanted to talk to you again about Kanto Gyutos. I just can't get enough of this. Western style Japanese chef's knife. Carbon steel blade, Western style handle. This is the real OG Japanese chef's knife. And it's gone through, different modifications over the years, of course, but it has stayed fairly true to the old ones in that it is the Japanese version of a Western style chef's knife. So long before the gyuto with a Japanese handle and a chef's knife blade were these guys. And they're still definitely in production, they're still definitely in use. And the carbon steel ones are one of our favorites. And this is something that we recommend to a lot of folks for their first carbon steel knife. Especially these Sakai made ones, the Sakai Kikumori Nihonkou and the Naozumi Nihonkou. These are made with a Japanese tool steel that's not super reactive. It's not stainless, so you got to take care of it, but it's easy to sharpen, has nice edge life and good edge formation. That is, you can get a really good edge on it, and it's not super resistant to sharpening stones, so it's easy to work on. They don't interact with a lot of ingredients the way that really reactive carbon steels can, but still a carbon steel knife, so it has all the pluses and minuses of that. However, it's not as daunting to use a carbon steel knife as I think a lot of people consider it to be. Think of it like the difference between a cast iron pan and a stainless steel pan. But anyways, these are not expensive. They are super hardworking. The Sakai Kikumori Nihonkou we've been selling for decades, and we've had a chance to see them kind of come through a lot of home cooks, a lot of professional cooks, watch them get sharpened over the years and get to talk to folks about their feedback on them and what their thoughts have been. And also, I use this knife for my sharpening class. I think it's a really excellent knife to learn how to sharpen on. It's responsive to stones, gets a really nice edge. But it's not so much of a softball that there's not a chance to learn with it. But really awesome cutting feel off of these two, and we've been able to add one to the lineup that I've been really stoked about. This is the Morihei Hisamoto one. This is still made in Tokyo, so it's a bit of a hen's tooth in that sense. Not many knives are still made in the Tokyo area, like a lot of industrial areas in big metropolitan areas. Combination of rising property value, people deciding they want to live in industrial areas and then complaining about living in an industrial area has led to the decline of a lot of these little factories and just the aging out as well of the craftspeople. But this one is still forged, so the average kind of seki Nihonkou Kanto Gyuto will have a stamped blade. So the blade is punched from sheet, and then the bolster is welded on, and the handle's applied. And that's a great, effective, inexpensive production method. It makes a great knife. So it's not, not Dog Onyx is not forged. Not everything has to be forged. You can have really great knives that aren't forged. But the forging on this one makes for a really long edge life, a really fine edge formation. These come with a natural stone finish from the maker, which just, it feels like it just kind of folds itself through the cuts. Really great sharpening on these two. Super stoked to be able to add a legit Tokyo-made Kanto Gyuto. They're a little more expensive than the Seki-made ones, but if you like these kind of knives, if you've already used up a good portion of one of your Kanto Gyutos from Seki, then maybe consider one of these guys. But one thing that I think is important to note with a lot of these knives, and it applies to a lot of other Japanese knives, is oftentimes there's a right-hand bias to them, and these knives all have a little bit or a lot bit of right-hand bias. And when you're shopping for a knife, one thing that is a great tool to assess how much bias there is to use a business card or a credit card to see what the shape of the face of the blade is. So all of these are hand ground. You'll still find a lot of hand grinding in the somewhat small and mid-size Japanese production, and it's a real important feature to having a knife move smoothly through food and not get too thick as it gets sharpened. But if you're left-handed, this might throw you off. So I think it's important to be able to assess it. Or if you're right-handed, it might throw you too. It's good to know ahead of time what to expect. Kind of real briefly, the pros and cons of an asymmetrical or symmetrical grind. And we're not just talking about the edge, we're talking about the whole face of the blade. So quite often for a right-hand user with the right-hand bias, this whole face of the blade, this side of the blade, will have more convexity than the inside, which will be a little bit flatter. This will make the blade hug up against what you're cutting and will allow you to do really fine, controlled, small work. However, it will also want to kind of curve a little bit. So it's not going to cut as straight naturally. You'll have to kind of maneuver the knife to cut straight on something big, so like a melon or a big cabbage, something like that. But when you're working on something small, garlic, shallots, ginger, something like that you want to get really tiny work with, having a little bit of bias, provided that you're right-handed, will really help your work. However, it's good to know what you're getting involved with when you're picking a knife out. So I like to use a card on the face of the blade, and not sure if we're going to catch this here in the video, but if you put the card flat on the side of the knife for the right hand outside, check and see what kind of gap you have behind the edge between the card and the knife. So you might see that one side has a bit of a gap, and then the right hand inside has very little. So these will have more or less of that. The Naozumi has some, but probably the least of all of these. The Morihei has the most. So, good to know when you're picking out a knife. It is possible to regrind the face of the knife to make it neutral. This is something that we can do, but it can be quite a bit of work. So, some to put in the hopper there. But highly recommend these. I think they're a really great addition to a knife kit. I think starting with a chef's knife for carbon steel is a great way to go. Don't start with a petty if you're starting with carbon steel and you want to dip your toe in that water. Petty knives, I think, are a little bit more difficult to use in carbon steel in that they get used with fruit, which is a lot more reactive than some other ingredients. Maybe a slicer would be the easiest, being that with proteins, they're the least reactive. However, you might have less opportunity to use a slicer than a chef's knife in many environments. But anyhow, strongly encourage these knives. A lot of them are really inexpensive. I mean, the Naozumi is not breaking the bank. So we get some questions comparing these two because they're pretty close in price, and they're both made in Seki. But the biggest difference is going to be that the Kikumori is a little bit heavier weight than the Naozumi. It's not super heavy. It's just a little bit thicker. And the surface grind, you might see it here in the reflections on it. Surface grinding on the Kikumori Nihonkou is a bit cleaner than on the Naozumi. It's a little bit more irregular. That kind of mellows out as you use the knife and it gets a patina and such, but it's there. So hope this is helpful. Hopefully, if you've been on the fence about checking out a Kanto Gyuto, I've been able to push you a little bit. I think they're so much fun, and great bit of living history here. All right, thanks again.